Night draped itself over Ouagadougou like a suffocating veil, heavy with silence, heavier with secrets. Within the palace walls, Ibrahim Traoré stood motionless, the weight of a folded letter trembling in his hands. Its ink was fresh, the handwriting all too familiar. His chest tightened as his eyes traced the words that dripped with betrayal, words from the one man he trusted more than his own blood. The candle beside him flickered as if mocking his disbelief. Betrayal was something he had always expected from foreign bankers, from hostile neighbors, from men in gold-lined suits sitting in European boardrooms. But betrayal from him, from the man who had marched beside him through fire and dust, who had once sworn an oath of loyalty not just to him but to the people, that was unthinkable. Shadows stretched across the room as the walls seemed to close in, suffocating. The palace corridor behind him was empty, yet it carried a whisper, the ghost of a conspiracy creeping closer with every heartbeat. He pressed the paper against the table, hands trembling not from fear, but from the unbearable sting of disappointment. Every betrayal is a wound, but the sharpest cuts come from those we let closest to our hearts. And for Traoré, who had chosen trust over paranoia, that wound was deep enough to bleed a nation dry. He raised his head, staring past the candle into the abyss of the night beyond the palace window. Outside, the city slept, unaware that the foundations of its fragile hope were being shaken from within. His soldiers trusted him. The people prayed for him. Yet in that very moment, someone he trusted more than anyone plotted to end not only his rule, but the dream he carried for millions. The question was not if the betrayal would strike. It was when. And as the first winds of a brewing storm rattled the glass, Ibrahim Traoré knew. The night had changed. Nothing would ever be the same again. What he discovered next would change the fate of a nation. The story of betrayal never begins with the betrayal itself. It begins long before, in the fragile roots of trust, loyalty, and brotherhood. For Ibrahim Traoré, trust had always been both his strength and his curse. He rose not as a tyrant, but as a soldier of the people, one who believed in camaraderie, in loyalty forged in the dust of the battlefield. Among the many faces who had stood beside him, one man had shone brighter than the rest, a comrade he had once called brother. This man, let us call him Captain Diallo, was not just an ally. He was the confidant who knew the weight of Traoré's sleepless nights, who had carried his share of pain when bullets tore through comrades, who had helped plan the defenses when mercenaries tried to destabilize the new order. Where others saw only a leader, Diallo saw the man beneath the red beret, weary, human, vulnerable. It was in the early days of Traoré's rise, when he was still consolidating power against mercenary threats and internal plots, that their bond was cemented. In the dust-choked northern deserts, when their unit was surrounded and outnumbered, it was Diallo who pulled Traoré from the rubble of a collapsed building after an explosion. Bloodied, coughing, Traoré had looked into Diallo's eyes and seen something he rarely allowed himself to feel: absolute trust. From that day, Diallo was more than a soldier. He became the man who stood closest in the war councils, the one whose voice carried weight when others doubted. Where others schemed for power, Diallo seemed content with loyalty, or so it appeared. Yet even as their brotherhood deepened, the land itself was unraveling. Burkina Faso bled from every seam. Droughts starved the harvests, corruption gnawed at state coffers, and whispers of rebellion haunted the countryside. Mothers clutched children who wasted away from hunger. Soldiers grumbled in silence as pay arrived late, and across the borders, eyes watched with predatory hunger for weakness. It was in this atmosphere of despair that Traoré relied most on Diallo. Together they mapped out food convoys, secured villages, rallied troops. To the outside world, their bond was unbreakable. Traoré, the face of courage. Diallo, the shadow beside him, But shadows have their own loyalties. The first sign was small, almost invisible, a delay in reporting troop movements. Diallo claimed it was a miscommunication, a mistake. Traoré dismissed it. Trust demanded forgiveness, and who better to forgive than a brother? The second sign was quieter still. A set of papers missing from a secured desk, intelligence reports that contained sensitive positions of loyalist troops. Again, Diallo had an explanation, a courier's error, a misplaced file. Traoré's brow had furrowed, but again, trust demanded belief. Yet doubt, once planted, is a seed that never stops growing. The people continued to suffer, and Traoré bore the burden like a soldier carrying the weight of a wounded comrade. In the villages, women's eyes glimmered with both admiration and desperation when he passed. "You are the hope left to us," they would say, their voices brittle as glass. And each time he returned to the palace, to Diallo, who told him, "We will not fail them." But words are fragile things, and sometimes they hide more than they reveal. By the time rumors began to spread, whispers of Diallo holding secret meetings with foreign envoys, of hushed conversations in candle-lit rooms, the air around the palace had already thickened with suspicion. Soldiers who once marched in perfect unison now stole glances at one another, uncertain. And Traoré? He still clung to hope. For in a world drowning in betrayal, he needed at least one soul to believe in. One anchor to hold against the tide. But anchors too can sink ships. For weeks the signs grew darker. Food convoys went missing. Villages supposedly secured were ambushed. Loyal officers began to vanish one by one. The pattern was invisible to most, but to Traoré it was clear as blood on snow. He began to suspect, but suspicion alone was poison. To act without proof would fracture everything. Late at night in his private study, he stared at the maps littered with red pins and markers. His people starved. His soldiers doubted. His enemies circled, and beside him the man he trusted most smiled, swore loyalty, and said, "We will endure." But Ibrahim Traoré's instincts whispered otherwise. Something darker was moving beneath the surface. And when the letter arrived, the one written in Diallo's own hand, sealed with a crest that should never have touched foreign hands, the seed of doubt blossomed into a truth too bitter to swallow. Traoré sat alone, candlelight flickering on his uniform, the red beret casting a shadow across his face. He had fought mercenaries, resisted foreign bankers, stared down generals, but nothing prepared him for this, the betrayal of the man he had once called brother. The Feuille city slept unaware. The world turned, indifferent. But for Traoré, the night had split in two, before the betrayal and after, and in the silence of that breaking, he understood. The greatest battles are not fought on the battlefield. They are fought in the heart against the ones we love most. The palace was no longer a sanctuary. Its corridors, once filled with the rhythmic steps of loyal soldiers, now echoed with an uneasy silence. Whispers traveled faster than boots across stone. Even the air seemed heavier, charged with secrets. Ibrahim Traoré sat in the war council chamber, his military uniform sharp, his red beret resting firmly on his head, a symbol of unyielding strength. Around the table sat his officers, their eyes avoiding his, their voices subdued. And among them, Captain Diallo sat as if nothing were amiss. His face was calm, his voice steady, his loyalty seemingly intact. But Ibrahim's eyes, sharper than a falcon's, now saw what others could not, the mask behind the man. The betrayal had not yet been revealed publicly, but its symptoms festered everywhere. Convoys carrying sacks of millet and maize to starving. Villages were intercepted before arrival. Rebel groups once disorganized, now struck with surgical precision, as though guided by inside information. And in the mining regions, foreign contractors suddenly reappeared, emboldened, as if assured that the ground beneath Burkina Faso was once again up for sale. Traoré's hands curled into fists under the table. He had fought so hard to keep his nation's dignity intact, refusing the chains of neo-colonial debt, resisting the pressure of foreign armies, standing firm against mercenary infiltrations. But betrayal from within, that was a cancer. And cancers had to be cut out before they consumed the body. That night, under the veil of darkness, he summoned a handful of his most trusted aides. No generals, no council members, only the few, men whose loyalty had been tested in fire and blood. They met in a dimly lit storeroom beneath the palace where maps were spread out across crates of old ammunition. This is no longer a matter of suspicion. Ibrahim's voice was low, heavy, his beret shadowing his face. Convoys vanish. Villages are exposed. Information leaks. Someone feeds the enemy. One of his aides leaned forward. "Do you suspect Diallo, Captain?" The name hung in the air like a blade. Ibrahim closed his eyes for a moment before answering. "I suspect no one, but the evidence points where it points." His tone was bitter. "And if it is him, then he has betrayed not only me, but the people." The men exchanged uneasy glances. To accuse Diallo was to accuse a national hero in the making, a man loved by many in the army. Such an accusation could tear the fragile unity apart. The following. Weeks unfolded like a tightening noose. Ibrahim moved carefully, speaking less, watching more. He placed men he trusted in positions to shadow Diallo's movements. Reports trickled in, secret meetings in the outskirts, conversations with men whose names carried the stench of foreign intelligence. Bags of currency, crisp and unfamiliar, were seen exchanging hands. Still, Diallo smiled at Ibrahim in council meetings. Still, he raised his fist in salute. Still, he called him brother. But betrayal, Ibrahim now realized, does not always wear the face of an enemy. Sometimes it wears the smile of a friend. The breaking point came with the massacre at Koudougou. A village had sent word to the palace, begging for protection. Ibrahim himself had ordered Diallo to dispatch reinforcements, 2 companies of soldiers, enough to hold back any rebel advance. But when the attack came, there were no reinforcements. The village burned, families were slaughtered, and the time survivors staggered into Ouagadougou, their eyes wide with horror. Their stories painted a truth too clear to ignore. The reinforcements had never left. Diallo had held them back, claiming mechanical failures had grounded the trucks. Yet those same trucks were later seen miles away, transporting goods toward a border post rumored to be under foreign control. The chamber of Ibrahim's heart grew colder that night. This was no longer suspicion. This was betrayal, carved into fire and blood. Still, he did not confront Diallo outright. No, to strike without certainty would ignite chaos. Instead, he devised a plan. He would lure the traitor into the open. He announced a secret convoy, a shipment of weapons and food disguised as a routine patrol. Only a handful of his most loyal aides knew the truth. The convoy was bait. Hidden within its ranks were Ibrahim's most trusted soldiers, men prepared for ambush. If Diallo leaked the information, the enemy would appear. And when they did, Ibrahim himself would be waiting. The trap was set. The night of the convoy was heavy with tension. Ibrahim rode at its center, his red beret unmistakable under the moonlight, his eyes scanning the horizon. The trucks rumbled through the dust-choked road, their engines growling like beasts in the dark. Hours passed. Nothing. Then, in the distance, movement. Shadows breaking across the ridges. The unmistakable click of weapons being readied. An ambush. Bullets tore into the night, shattering the silence. The convoy erupted into chaos. Soldiers ducking, engines roaring, gunfire lighting the sky. But Ibrahim was ready. He leapt from his vehicle, weapon in hand, his uniform gleaming under the bursts of fire, his beret unwavering like a flag of defiance. His men moved with precision, their traps springing shut around the attackers. When the dust cleared, the enemy lay scattered. Among the bodies, documents were found, maps, orders, and payment receipts. And stamped on those papers was a mark that froze Ibrahim's blood. It was the same seal he had seen on the letter, the same crest that tied back, unmistakably, to Diallo. There was no doubt now. The man he once called brother was a traitor, but betrayal is never just personal. It spreads like wildfire, igniting suspicions, dividing loyalties, weakening foundations. And as Ibrahim returned to the palace that night, weary and battle-stained, he knew. The true war was not against mercenaries or foreign bankers. It was against the dagger pointed at his back by the one man he had once trusted most. And the time to confront him was drawing near. The palace walls seemed to close in as the weight of betrayal pressed against Ibrahim's chest. He had seen enough. Documents recovered from the ambush left no room for doubt. Diallo was not just careless or compromised. He was an active hand guiding the knives of enemies toward Burkina Faso's heart. For days, Ibrahim carried the burden in silence, moving through official ceremonies and council meetings with the same unflinching composure. But inside, a storm raged. How many times had they marched side by side through battlefields? How many nights had they shared bread, dreams, and the vision of a free Africa? How could that brotherhood end here, in betrayal? The answer waited in the shadows of the War Council chamber. Tonight, there would be no escape, no masks, no pretense, only truth. The chamber was dim, lit by a single oil lamp swaying gently in the humid air. Ibrahim stood at the far end of the long wooden table, his uniform crisp, his red beret casting a sharp silhouette across his stern face. Papers lay spread before him, maps, reports, the damning evidence gathered from the ambush. The doors creaked. Captain Diallo entered, his boots striking the floor with calculated confidence. He carried the same calm demeanor, the same practiced smile that once reassured Ibrahim in darker times. "My brother," Diallo greeted, raising his hand in salute. Ibrahim did not return it. His voice cut through the silence. "Close the doors." 2. Guards pushed the heavy doors shut and remained posted outside. Now it was only the two of them, soldier and soldier, brother and brother, leader and traitor. For a long moment, Ibrahim said nothing. He studied Diallo's face as though searching for the man he once knew beneath the cold veneer. Finally, he slid the documents across the table. "Explain this." Diallo glanced down. His eyes skimmed over the papers, the intercepted payments, the coordinates of ambushes, the seal of foreign intelligence. His expression barely flickered. Then he leaned back, clasping his hands behind him. "You've been busy," he said quietly. "Busy?" Ibrahim's voice hardened. "Men are dead. Villages are ash. You fed our enemies with their blood." Diallo's calm broke into a faint, bitter smile. "And what have you given them, Ibrahim? Promises. Empty speeches of sovereignty. You think, standing against the world will save this country? The world will crush us. Better to bend now and live than stand proud and starve." Ibrahim slammed his fist on the table, the lamp flickering with the force. "We are not slaves," his voice echoed through the chamber. "I will not sell this land to foreigners for a bowl of coins. I will not betray my people for survival." Dressed as chains. Diallo's eyes darkened. "Then you will lead them to ruin. And when this country collapses, history will not remember you as a savior. It will remember you as the fool who defied giants." The words struck like blades. For a brief, terrible second, Ibrahim saw the boy he once fought beside, the young soldier who had believed in the same dream. But that boy was gone, replaced by a man hardened by fear, temptation, and the weight of foreign gold. Ibrahim's voice, lowered, heavy with sorrow. You were my brother, Diallo. I trusted you with everything, and you chose silver over blood. Diallo's composure cracked. He stepped forward, pointing a trembling finger. I chose survival. You think this people love you? They cheer today, but tomorrow, when the grain runs out and the guns fall silent, they will curse your name. I gave them a future. You give them martyrdom. The room trembled with their voices, two visions of Africa clashing like thunder. The silence that followed was worse than shouting. Ibrahim stepped around the table slowly, his boots deliberate, his gaze never leaving Diallo. The red beret cast a shadow over his eyes, but the fire within them burned through. You speak of survival, Ibrahim said, his tone cutting like steel. But a man who sells his people survives only as a ghost. You betrayed me. You betrayed Burkina Faso, and for that there can be no forgiveness. Diallo's hand moved, too quickly, too nervously. His fingers brushed the pistol at his side. In a flash, Ibrahim drew his own sidearm, leveling it at the man he once called brother. The chamber fell into deadly silence. The two men locked in a standoff that carried the weight of a nation's fate. For a heartbeat, time froze. Two soldiers, once bound by loyalty, now stood at the edge of an abyss. The lamp flickered, shadows dancing like restless spirits on the walls. Diallo's hand hovered, his breathing shallow. His eyes darted, not to Ibrahim, but to the door. The window, anywhere but the piercing gaze of the man who had once been his comrade. Finally, he dropped his hand. His pistol remained holstered. A bitter laugh escaped his lips. So this is how it ends, he whispered. Not on the battlefield, not in glory, but in the shadows of your palace. Ibrahim did not lower his weapon. His voice was firm, final. No, Diallo. This ends because you chose the enemy, and a traitor's end is written long before the trigger is pulled. The guards burst in at the signal of Ibrahim's nod. They seized Diallo, forcing his arms behind his back as he struggled. His curses echoed down the corridor, venomous, defiant, broken. Ibrahim stood motionless, watching him dragged away. The weight of leadership pressed heavier than ever. Victory did not taste like triumph. It tasted like ashes. In the silence of the war chamber, he placed his pistol back on the table. The red beret rested firmly on his head, but for the first time in years, it felt unbearably heavy. The brotherhood was gone. The trust was shattered. And though he had saved his country from one enemy, Ibrahim knew countless others still circled in the shadows. This was not the end. It was only the climax of one betrayal in a war that had no end. The palace was restless that night. Word of Captain Diallo's arrest spread faster than wildfire, whispered through corridors and shouted in the barracks. For the soldiers who had once looked to him as a commander, disbelief hung heavy in the air. Some refused to accept it. Not Captain Diallo, they muttered. He fought with us at Ouagadougou. He saved men under fire. He was loyal. Others, darker in their suspicions, nodded grimly. I always knew he was too close to the foreigners. He spent too much time in their company. Division simmered, threatening to fracture the unity that Ibrahim had fought so hard to build. Ibrahim stood before the council the next morning, his red beret casting its familiar shadow across his sharp features. The war chamber was packed. Generals, ministers, advisors, all demanding clarity. Traitor, one general barked. You accuse Diallo of selling this country? Prove it. Ibrahim said nothing at first. He laid the documents on the table. Financial records, coded messages, intercepted orders. Each one a nail in the coffin of Diallo's reputation. He let the council read in silence, their shifting eyes betraying their thoughts. Finally, he spoke. Loyalty is not a word we wear like a uniform, Ibrahim declared. It is tested in fire. Diallo was tested, and he chose silver over blood. His betrayal cost us lives, and for that, he will answer to the law of this land. The chamber was silent. None dared challenge the evidence. But still, the wound was deep. For every man convinced, another felt the sting of disillusionment. Diallo had been more than an officer. He had been a symbol. And symbols, when broken, do not die quietly. That evening, Ibrahim walked the palace courtyard alone. The torchlight flickered against the ancient stone walls, throwing long shadows. His boots echoed in the silence. For the first time in years, he allowed himself a pause, a crack in the armor of leadership. His heart was heavy. He replayed the confrontation in his mind. Diallo's voice, trembling yet defiant, his bitter laughter as he was dragged away. It haunted him. This was no victory. It was the severing of blood brotherhood, the loss of a man who had once shared his dream. He stopped beneath the great fig tree in the center of the courtyard, the same tree where, years ago, he and Diallo had spoken of freedom and Africa's future. He remembered Diallo's youthful smile, his words, "One day, we'll change everything, brother." Now those words felt like ghosts mocking him in the night. The following day, Ibrahim made his most difficult decision yet. He called the soldiers to gather in the parade ground. The entire barracks turned out, rows upon rows of men in fatigues, their eyes sharp with suspicion, curiosity, and pain. Ibrahim stood before them in full military dress, his red beret a beacon of authority. His voice carried across the ground like thunder. "Men of Burkina Faso, hear me. Yesterday, we discovered a truth that cut deep into our hearts. Captain Diallo, a man many of you trusted, a man who fought beside us, betrayed this nation. He sold our blood to foreign hands. This truth is bitter, but it must be faced." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Ibrahim raised his hand, steadying them. "Do not let his betrayal poison your faith. We are soldiers. Our loyalty is not to one man, but to our land, our people, and our children's future. Diallo chose his path. We must choose ours. And I promise you this, never again will Burkina Faso bow to those who would buy its soul." The ground erupted in thunderous chants. "Burkina Faso! Burkina Faso!" Their voices shook the air, not in blind devotion, but in fierce resolve. Ibrahim stood tall, but inside, the fire was tempered by grief. Later that night, Ibrahim sat in his study, staring at an unopened letter left on his desk. It bore no seal, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Diallo's, a final note written before his arrest. With heavy fingers, Ibrahim unfolded it. "Brother, if you read this, then I have failed. I do not expect forgiveness, nor do I ask for it. But know this, I never hated you. I envied you. Your conviction, your certainty, your faith in this country. I feared the world would break us. I chose a path of survival, but perhaps it was weakness. Perhaps it was cowardice. Whatever history says of me, remember only this. Once, I loved this land as you do. And once, I called you brother." The words blurred as Ibrahim's eyes stung. He folded the letter carefully, pressing it to his chest before placing it in the locked drawer of his desk. It would remain there, unseen by others, a reminder of what betrayal cost and what it meant to lead. The days that followed were turbulent. Foreign voices condemned the arrest. Agents tried to stir dissent within the army. But Ibrahim, stronger than ever, stood before his people with unshakable resolve. He had paid the price of trust, of leadership, of betrayal. And though his heart still carried the wound of Diallo's fall, he used that pain as fuel to stand taller. The betrayal had not broken him. It had reforged him into iron. Weeks passed, and yet the echo of Diallo's betrayal lingered like a stubborn wound across Burkina Faso. The trial had been swift, the evidence undeniable. Diallo was sentenced not with vengeance, but with the sober weight of justice. He was imprisoned in silence, far from the capital, his name erased from records of honor, his legacy cut short. But erasure was not so simple. His name still lingered in the hearts of men who had once admired him, whispered in hushed conversations, mourned not only for the man, but for what he represented, the fragility of loyalty, the danger of unchecked ambition. For Ibrahim, the days following felt like walking through a graveyard of memories. Everywhere he went, he saw ghosts, not of the dead, but of the living. The laughter he once shared with Diallo around a campfire, the blood they had spilled side by side on the battlefield, the oaths sworn under starlit skies, promising never to betray the people. Those ghosts did not vanish easily. The country itself seemed to hold its breath. Would this fracture tear the army apart? Would doubt fester in the hearts of soldiers? Would foreign powers exploit the wound? These were the questions whispered by analysts, politicians, and ordinary citizens alike. But Ibrahim understood something deeper. He knew betrayal could either weaken a nation or forge it stronger. The difference lay in how the story was told. So he chose to tell it not as tragedy, but as warning. Not as weakness, but as proof that vigilance must never sleep. One evening, under a bruised orange sunset, Ibrahim stood before the youth of Ouagadougou in a crowded square. Thousands gathered, not as soldiers, but as citizens, the farmers, the students, the workers, the children who would inherit the land. He raised his hand, and silence swept the crowd. "You have heard what has happened," he began, his voice steady, carrying across the square. "You have heard of betrayal, of weakness in a man once strong. And you ask yourselves, if even the loyal can turn, who can we trust?" He paused, scanning the faces. Young men with calloused hands, women holding their children, elders leaning on canes. Trust cannot be demanded. It must be earned, again and again. Every leader, every soldier, every citizen must prove their loyalty, not in words, but in action. And when one of us falls, we must not despair. We must rise stronger. Because Burkina Faso is not the name of one man, nor the power of one uniform. Burkina Faso is the heart of its people. The crowd erupted, not with the chants of soldiers this time, but with the voices of ordinary men and women shouting, "We are Burkina Faso! We are Burkina Faso!" That night, Ibrahim returned to the palace and sat once more at his desk. The ISO, letter from Diallo, remained locked away, but its words weighed on him still. He realized something profound. Leadership was not only about defeating enemies, but about carrying the burden of those who had failed. Diallo's betrayal would haunt him for years, but it also became his silent teacher. He vowed never to let envy grow unchecked in his circle again. He vowed to share responsibility, to nurture the loyalty of his men with trust and transparency. Betrayal had nearly broken him, but it had also reshaped him into a leader sharper, wiser, less naive. History, too, took note. Writers, journalists, and elders began to tell the story not only of Diallo's treachery, but of Ibrahim's response. They spoke of how he chose not revenge, but justice, how he steadied his soldiers in their moment of doubt, how he stood before the people and transformed a scar into a symbol of resilience. And slowly, the bitterness softened. The betrayal became less about the man who fell and more about the lesson it carried. Years later, when Ibrahim's name was etched among Africa's leaders, some would whisper of that night, the night he faced the betrayal of a brother. They would say it was the night his leadership was truly tested, the crucible that burned away any illusions of friendship above country, of personal bonds above duty. And those who remembered Diallo, the fiery, charismatic officer who once dreamed of freedom, spoke of him not with hatred, but with caution. His story became a parable told to young recruits. Loyalty is not a promise you make once, it is a promise you keep every day. For Ibrahim himself, the scar remained private. On certain nights, when the palace grew quiet and the world outside slept, he would unlock that drawer and take out the letter. He would read it again, his eyes tracing the words of a man who had chosen wrong, yet who, in his final honesty, revealed the human weakness behind the betrayal. And each time, Ibrahim would whisper to himself, "May I never forget. May I never become blind to the dangers within. May I lead with vigilance, but also with heart." In the end, Ibrahim Traoré walked forward, not as a man untouched by betrayal, but as a man who had faced it, survived it, and used it to forge something stronger. The legacy of that dark night was not one of despair, but of resilience. The lesson was clear, the impact undeniable. Betrayal is a shadow that follows power. But it is in how one responds, with vengeance or with justice, with despair or with strength, that true leadership is revealed. And in facing the betrayal of the one he trusted most, Ibrahim revealed not weakness, but greatness.